Always true.
Washington is reviving its so-called Monroe Doctrine, a 19th century policy through which it claimed Latin America as its strategic sphere of influence. In its new national security strategy, the US goes even further, declaring a Trump corollary to the doctrine, a pledge to operate wherever and whenever it chooses in the Western Hemisphere, to block rivals like China from gaining influence, and to take military action if it deems it necessary. At the same time, US forces have been striking vessels in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, accusing them of carrying drugs without providing evidence. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says the killings violate international law and amount to extrajudicial executions. Critics warn the United States is acting as judge, jury and executioner on the high seas, and that maritime attacks could lead to something bigger. Some argue the real test of this revived doctrine may be Venezuela, and whether Washington's actions signal a renewed push for regime change. Uruguay, long one of the region's most stable democracies, says it wants to act as a facilitator for peace. But what will this mediation look like when great power politics returns to the hemisphere, with China now a major economic partner, including for Uruguay, and when security models like President Nayib Bukele's crackdown in El Salvador, praised by some for reducing gang violence, condemned by others as abusive, divide the region on human rights and the politics of fear. Meanwhile, South America faces unprecedented migration flows, cross-border crime and humanitarian pressures as the global system Uruguay has historically defended struggles to respond to crises in Gaza, Ukraine and Sudan. So how does Uruguay navigate a hemisphere defined once again by power politics, contested sovereignty and a resurgent interest from the US? And where does Latin America fit in the world where global rules are eroding? Uruguay's Foreign Minister Mario Lubetkin talks to Al Jazeera. Mario Lubetkin, Foreign Minister of Uruguay, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. I'd like to start with what's probably the biggest issue in your region right now, which is what's been going on since September, repeated attacks by the US on ships, often fishing boats, in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific Ocean. What is Uruguay's view of this?
First of all, we are worried like all in the region. And that's not the point which type of government can be, right, left. The point is the tensions. So if you ask to us what we are thinking and what we are working, is to try to reduce the tension. Because something that for us is very clear, if we don't maintain peaceful in the region, it's the only region without any type of conflict. And there are still a consensus in the region from many years ago in which we need to maintain our region with peace and without nuclear weapons. And that is something that I think that is part of the cultural approach of our countries. Just when you ask me this, I say we need to work to reduce tension. This is the way in which we need to work now, because the effect of what is happening in the Caribbean area can affect all the region and not only part of the region, one. And second, can affect the social economic scenario. Because you know perfectly that with high tension or with war or with attack, the situation of the population in the region in which there are this type of issue, war and so on, is only negative. You know that I come from an international UN organization, and we were so clear that with war, we cannot resolve the problem of hunger. And that is the same concept now. So our focus, and we are working with other countries, is to try to reduce tension and to preserve peace. This is the challenge that we have now in the framework of this situation.
As you say, you were a former UN official for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, a senior official there. You know the UN Charter very well because it's the rule book, not just for UN staff, but for the international order. That rule book does say that you can take military action, but only in very specific circumstances. The US now says it's acting to counter what they say is narco-terror. They say narco-terror is no different from Al-Qaeda. What do you make of their legal justification?
First of all, there are not legal justification to create an increasingly tension from one country to the other. But the point is, or we focus in a negative aspect, or we try to work in a positive way to try to solve the problem. And we are working in the second part.
Just to be clear on the US's action, the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the UN, he is the guardian of human rights in the UN system, Volker Turk. He says the attacks violate international law and amount to extrajudicial killings. The US has not provided any proof for the claims they make. In effect, the US military is acting as the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Just to be absolutely clear, do you believe these actions are illegal?
No, I don't say that are illegal. I'm convinced, we are convinced that we are not going the correct way. We are convinced that we are increasing the risk. We are not talking about that. We are talking about the fact that what we will do. So one of the issues that is easy for us is we can condemn this or that. And we can say we are against this and we are in favor of that. What we can do after that? I think that the rule that not only Uruguay, I'm talking about the region, because if you follow what the many presidents are talking, I repeat, if they come from right or come from left or come from center, it's to say we need to preserve peace in the region. This is the challenge. If you ask to me, which is the magic way? Obviously that we are not the magic way, but it's clear that we need to find a way. I repeat, I can say that we are not going the correct way. That is clear. It's not something that I say that no other can understand that. For us, it's the second question. How we can work to try to change the trend, to preserve the best of the region. If not, all of us will have a lot of problems for the future.
Well, the US is right. The region does have a serious drug problem. That is a serious drug problem. But President Trump keeps talking about fentanyl. Well, fentanyl's got nothing to do with Venezuela, has it? Fentanyl's not coming into the US from Venezuela. It's mainly coming in from Mexico.
That's a point that is clear. When we are talking about trafficking and we are talking about drugs, it's logical that it's not a Caribbean issue. It's an issue for the world, but for all of our region. That is one of the big problems that we have in the region. So it's logically to discuss about this type of issue. Uruguay, that is a very nice country, so stabilized for many decades, we have now the problem of traffic of drugs that didn't happen before. And that can affect till scenarios of stabilities. I don't talk about other countries in which there are very big problems. You're talking about Mexico. I can talk about Ecuador and many others in which the government and other actors are fighting a lot to try to find solutions. That is the point that we don't have.
You clearly are very concerned about the tension, and President Trump has now said that perhaps he will expand this operation and targets that are on land in Venezuela. I mean, how much worse could this get?
Hope that we can preserve the dialogue way and the cooperation way. That is the point in which we will work. Unilateral ways, we can talk in Latin America, but we can talk in the Ukrainian war and many others, is not the way to try to really resolve the problem. Anyway, I think that the most important issue is from the position that each one has, we need to work, we, not Uruguay, we all together need to work to try to develop dialogue, solution, potential solution to rise and to resolve the problems. Because the problem exists, that's the point. What we are discussing is the way to resolve the problem, not about the problems itself. And that is the point in which no one can be neutral in this game.
President Maduro claims it's not about drugs. He claims the US wants its oil. Others say the US is trying to execute a regime change, like they did with Saddam Hussein in Iraq. What do you make of the motives of the US?
It can be this or that or other difference. For us, it's not the point to rise, and it's not because I don't want to answer your question, because, we can have different approach about the issue like you highlight. But for countries like Uruguay or many of the region is to try to understand, to push dialogue and to push to try to reduce this type of tension. We have a very good relation with the United States. We don't recognize the election in Venezuela, but at the same time, with Venezuela, we open our consulate because we have a lot of Venezuelans in Uruguay and there are a lot of Uruguayans in Venezuela, and we need to resolve the real problem of each one of them. Just for this, we decided a few months ago, in the framework of don't recognize the election process, to open ways to try to resolve the real problem of the city. And we are very happy because other countries in the region follow what we agreed like a way. So the point is, it's a combination of many issues. It's not black and white.
It seems to me there are two different issues here. There's the US and what it's doing with regard to Venezuela, and then related, there is the internal Venezuela issue. As you say, you don't recognize the election victory of President Maduro, declared the winner, but many observers said not a free and fair.
And many of the countries of the region.
It said it was not a free and fair election. If you're going to pursue this mediation, facilitation role, which is the priority, the internal struggle within Venezuela or the tensions with the US and the current government of Venezuela?
I think that there is a connection between both. Yeah? I think that you cannot split both. We need to try to decrease and reduce the regional tension at the same time to try to help, but I don't say Uruguay. We are talking about the responsibility of Latin America and the Caribbean to try to create, or to help to create a better scenario in the country if the actors in the countries request us, not only Uruguay, to try to help and to try to develop different type of dialogue. Obviously, we cannot do anything if there are not, we don't receive open doors for the different actors. But the point is clear that the scenario in Venezuela is something like all of us need to work to try to go in the way that the most of the region want to go. And we want to work in the concept of peace, but not the traditional concept of peace between peace and war. For us, peace in the framework of all that you are saying is human rights, is fight against terrorism, is fight against narco-traffic. We are talking about 33 countries, so we are talking about the region, and the region need to play like a region.
And of course the US isn't part of the region, but it is the big neighbor of the region. The Monroe Doctrine, back in 1823, it was proclaimed by President James Monroe, stated no new European colonies would be allowed in Latin America, and it became the way that the US exerted its influence and intervened in the region. But it's not history. There's a new national security strategy from the United States which says we're going to assert and enforce a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. What do you make of that, using colonial instruments to try and control your region?
First of all, it's clear that the world is changing completely, and the region is changing completely. Our relation with the United States is excellent and will continue to be excellent. But it's another world. We are in another world completely, in which is changing dramatically in a permanently way, and each country are developing, each country of the region are developing in a very well scenario, who better, who less better. So the point that each type of discussion is logically that it's something that need to be understood in the framework of the new, not in the framework of what's happened 100 years ago or 50 years ago, because really we are in another world, not only Latin America and the Caribbean, in the world. If we are thinking in Qatar now, if we are thinking in Qatar 50 years ago, just is the point. But at the same time, we are, and we will continue to have excellent relation with the United States. So the point is how we will develop the balance to develop in the best way for all of us, because this is the point in which we need to be.
You talk about a new world. We're certainly in a new world, and some of the big powers believe, I think, might is right, and that they must have their sphere of influence. The US in this strategy has chosen your countries, your region, as their sphere of influence, and the strategy says they'll operate anywhere in the region they want, allowing us to assert ourselves confidently where and when we need in the region, is what the strategy says. Are you comfortable with the US having a roaming military security role in your region?
First of all, what we think is where we are. And where we are. I put an example. Mercosur will sign the free trade agreement with all the European Union. That will change completely our relationship. In the world, will be the most highest free trade agreement in the world. We are talking about more than 700 million people. We signed it in Rio de Janeiro 2 months ago, the agreement with EFTA, Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. We are in a very good way with the Trans-Pacific countries. We are negotiating from Mercosur in this example with Canada, with Emirates, with Singapore. We are in another game. All of us are in another game.
Towards free trade, the absolute opposite of President Trump and his policies with tariffs.
This is the way I say, only not in confrontation with. We say what we are happy. And if we are thinking the other way, few months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, was the first meeting between the President of Uruguay, Amandu Orsi, with the Prime Minister of India, Modi. The first meeting in the story between a President of Uruguay and the Prime Minister of India, in which we discussed our relation for the next 10 years. And we have relationship, logically, with China, in which is our counterpart in trade in the last 13 years. So all these issues are happening.
But Minister, what you're doing there, and particularly China, that contradicts this Trump strategy. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. On the issue of China, I mean, Uruguay since 2022 has been working on a free trade agreement with China. Where does that stand now? That's paused or going to be done at a regional level?
From when we took our position on 1st of March, that point was not in the agenda now between China and Uruguay. But anyway, because we can talk about Uruguay, the most of the country in the region, China is the most important counterpart in trade. Is not Uruguay. The figures of Uruguay is more. We are thinking the big countries of the region and their
But isn't there a clash
China.
coming? You talk about your friendship with the US, and yet the things you've told me are the great achievements and what's going to happen soon are all things that the US doesn't want to happen.
The point for us is I explain where we are today, and at the same time we explain we are and we will develop for sure the best relationship with the United States. The point is we cannot cancel our life and all our development, because that means the development of our country, like we are working with the United States. Our contradiction. I repeat, we need to analyze a little bit better this document. But contradictory is the word, contradictory is the life, and we are sure that we will go in the best way, in the common interest for each country, because this is the only way of cooperation, if both of us are satisfied with the relation. That is something that we need to work and to continue to work. Remember that now, to put an example, we share the South American countries, the agreement between the South American countries that call it Consensus of Brasilia. Next year we will share Mercosur. We will share some coordination agreement between all the South-South countries in the framework of United Nations. So there are many tools in which we need to work in a positive ways to rise these elements that you say are contradictory. I think that we cannot be worried to use this type of word. The challenge is how we can work to go in the best way for all of us, and obviously for the interest of my country, Uruguay, or for the interest for the region.
You talked about a region largely free of conflict. The wider region, of course, there is conflict in Haiti. But it's a region that does have humanitarian crisis. Haiti, Venezuela, Ecuador, and transnational crime. How is the regional humanitarian situation affecting Ecuador?
When we met the President Noboa, when President Noboa came to Uruguay, because he was the president he was the chair of Consensus of Brasilia, he came to Uruguay to pass to us that. in which he talked a lot about the narco-traffic problem there in the country. And he talked to us about different experiences to try to approach. It's a very equatorial, in which he talked about many risks. But at the same time, the process is the combination between the risk and the ways that each country are finding. I think that we cannot combine Ecuador and Haiti. Haiti is our drama. In general, we don't use this word in the region because we are so polite, but it's a drama. And obviously that there are some resolutions from United Nations, from the State American Organization, and till now we couldn't find the best solution. We sent our peacekeeping in the past, and we filed it. We filed it. The international community filed it in the first step of peacekeeping. Now we are talking about peacekeeping again. We need to think about that. I think that the point is how we cannot repeat the same wrong from the past and to try to help situation like Haiti that is completely different than what's happening years ago. But now, because now you have in front of you armies and not only isolated bands. And that's unaffected for the narco-traffic scenario and the arms traffic, all the region, not us because we are in the south, but around Haiti, there are a lot of risks. This is something like, I think that we are a little bit late to try to rise. But this is the real problem. The rest, if you are talking about Mexico, Ecuador, we are talking about logical, another, Colombia and Bolivia, about the migration problem. This is something like, I think that is other pending issue that we need to work absolutely better at how we are working.
Well, how do you work better with these issues? The drugs trade, migration, organized crime. Your president, Yamando Orsi, recently said, I quote, "Security is a topic that needs to be discussed. Bukele is an example, El Salvador, an example of process." Now, he's referring to the El Salvador president, Nayib Bukele, very popular in his country because he's gone after the gangs, mass arrests against those gangs, yet human rights activists say those are abuses, there are claims of torture, heavy-handedness. I mean, are you seriously thinking of following his example?
First of all, he didn't say that, because I was in the meeting. I think that there is a little bit not exactly right, because perhaps was a little bit, was in an interview.
It's a translation, but I think it's part of what he said.
That is clear, but you know, if you push off of the context, easy. What he's saying and what we are saying is which type of experience in the region was with success. That is the point in which he said, was what happened in Salvador, and he talked about other examples. So the point is, why we are not the answer, because this is one of the key problems, more than this, is one of the most sensitive worries of the population, to be very clear. We need to find, not exactly to copy from this or that country, but we need to take in consideration all the successful scenarios to try to. He didn't talk about the successful, about what is happening in Salvador. We cannot ignore the fact that this is an example about something that are developing. So what we cannot say is because this or that example are under attack for the reason A or B or C, we need to forget that. We need to put all the examples in the region to try to understand what we can take from each one.
But raising that as an example, does that mean that under consideration are some tougher policies?
That means that is one of the examples that was developed in the region that not we need to consider to increase the jails. That's not the point. You know, to have a jail for 50,000 people there. We are not talking about that. What we are talking in a very, how I can say, calm scenario, which is the picture in the region. And what we can pick up, because Uruguay, you know, it's a very stabilized country with, obviously, if we compare with that, with less violence, with others, we have.
A small, stable country with currently a center-left coalition. This, I mean, if you start taking tougher policies, might you not have problems among your own ranks?
Yes, but, you know, I don't want to highlight the fact about this government is center-left, because that is an issue that we are discussing the last 20 years with right government and before left government, in which we couldn't resolve very well and the right couldn't resolve very well. So it's a problem. And that is the point that we are talking about state policies, in which all the political system need to work together, or to write solution together, or to write consensus together to try to find the solution. And just for this, we are looking and we are checking all the region to understand. This is what he said during the interview in which the president said that, but in this framework.
Finally, Minister, and this is not a brief subject, but I'm going to ask you about it briefly. As a former senior UN official, and now in your job as Foreign Minister, the issue of multilateralism and the UN, we've had wars in Gaza, in Sudan, in Ukraine. The UN tries to do something, but actually it becomes a bit-part actor. It's hardly involved. Is the multilateral system that you work for, can it be saved?
It's a question. It's a challenge. Something that is clear that if we are convinced that the world is changing, all need to change. Till you communicators all need to change. The point is clearly that the UN need to rethink themselves. Just for this, there is this discussion about UN Reform 80 and many others. So it's clear that what we have now is not enough. But more than this, when we are talking about multilateral, or when we are talking about United Nations, who is the owner of United Nations? The countries. And when there is a strong confrontation in the countries, logically that system like UN will be paralyzed because there are not agreements. The point is, okay, we take note about that. So we will continue that, or we will think about which type of multilateral, in this case United Nations, need to play in the future. We have a key point, many key points, but one key point for next year, that is the election of the new Secretary General of United Nations. Hope in the rotation process that can come from Latin America, and hope that can be an opportunity for a woman. That is what we want. But you think that is enough, that the most of the country in the world, or a consensus in the world, can elect her or him, and with that we resolve the United Nations? No, I think that this is a wrong issue. Or we decided who can be the new leader in the framework of the rethinking of the process, or we will fight it. And like you say, I was in this side, and now I'm in this side. So if we are not rethinking ourselves, not in silence, to talk openly, to find ways to try to understand that all is changing, the multilateral scenario, that we fight for that, and we are convinced that there are not other alternatives. We don't work together with a new scenario of consensus, not confrontation, we will have a lot of headache in the future, because we have economic problem, traffic problem, terrorist problem, climate change problem, and the problem will continue. The point is, if we countries can have the 193 that are United Nations, can work in the way to understand that all is changing, and we need to find new solutions, and we need to move very quickly, because it's moving very quickly, and because the citizens are not time to wait. And that is the point in which we are receiving a lot of pressure in each country. The population won't answer, not blah, blah, blah. This is the challenge that we have in each of our countries, and we are talking in the global. That is the big problem, the challenge that we need to take in our table to discuss and to try to find a good solution for the future.
Mario Lubetkin, Foreign Minister of Uruguay, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
More than welcome. Thanks for inviting me.